Hi everyone, my name is Gray, I'm Samantha's husband, and I wanted to make this video to confirm something that a lot of comments have already been discussing, namely that Samantha died earlier this month as a result of her breast cancer. So, given the spirit of this channel, explaining what's happened in Samantha's health and her treatment, I wanted to give you some understanding about what happened. Throughout December, Samantha was experiencing a lot of swelling in her lower extremities and in her abdomen, and toward the end of December, she went in for a PET scan, the first PET scan on the new treatment that she'd been doing for about 3 months, to determine whether or not that treatment was working and what the current status of her cancer was. But while she was there, the doctor was concerned by the swelling and determined that Samantha was in early stage heart failure, which was either due to the Enhertu medication that she'd stopped relatively recently, or the adriamycin AC chemo that she had been taking about 7 years ago. At any rate, just before Christmas, Samantha was hospitalized due to the early heart failure, with the goal of giving her diuretics to remove the excess fluid in her body and ease the burden on her heart. That was fairly successful. Her breathing, which had been a problem, improved significantly, but she still had a lot of swelling, and she was discharged from the hospital in time for Christmas. However, while we were in the hospital, we also learned the results of the PET scan, which were that her cancer was in some places receded and in some places had grown. And while the results were mixed and there was cause for both celebration and concern, the primary concern was her liver, where the spots had shrunk, but there were now many more of them. And so because of the significant liver involvement and the growth there and the abdominal swelling she'd had, the doctors made the plan to change her chemotherapy to some new options. The next week, Samantha started the week with a brain MRI to determine whether or not there had been any growth there. And it turned out there had been. There were actually 6 or so very small spots of cancer that had metastasized to her brain. At that point, we had discussed radiation or other options to remove those, and the doctor was less concerned about those lesions than he was about the cancer growth in her liver. The next day, Samantha was scheduled to have a liver biopsy to determine whether additional treatments, in addition to the chemo that she was going to start, maybe immunotherapy, for example, might be effective. But on the morning that we got up for her to go to the liver biopsy, she felt really just very, very bad. And we called the doctor, and he said that after the liver biopsy, they would admit her to the hospital and again, keep an eye on her heart. Well, we got to the hospital, and Samantha basically couldn't even walk into the hospital. We had to get her a wheelchair, get her inside, and get her downstairs for her liver biopsy. At that point, her heart rate was well over 200. I think it peaked somewhere around 220 beats per minute. And it was determined that not only could she not have the liver biopsy, but she needed to be immediately admitted and given some medicine to lower her heart rate. So they did that in the ER, then admitted her into the hospital. She was in the cardiac wing. And over the next few days, we moved between different wings of the hospital. But basically, she was improving. She received more diuresis for her heart to remove excess fluid, although there was still a lot of swelling in her abdomen and especially in her legs. And they were able to start the new chemo treatment while she was in the hospital, and they were keeping an eye on her heart. She then started the new chemo, which seemed to be effective. But then she developed a new condition called tumor lysis syndrome, which is something the doctors had prepared for, even though it's very rare. But basically, as I understand it, it means that the chemotherapy in destroying the cancer cells releases the things that were in the cancer cells, in particular a lot of electrolytes, particularly potassium in Samantha's case. And those can cause damage to the kidneys. So after having the treatment for her cancer, we woke up to a doctor recommending that she get dialysis to remove all the extra electrolytes from her blood. Ultimately, they decided that wasn't necessary. They kept an eye on the electrolytes, they gave her some medicine for it, and the tumor lysis syndrome was ultimately under control. And over the next few days, she remained in the hospital recovering. The numbers for her heart got better, the numbers for her liver got better, her electrolytes got better. She got rid of some excess fluid, but she still had a lot of swelling. But ultimately, she was very stable. She was in a decent amount of pain and on pain medication, but she seemed to be improving. In fact, one day she even got up and took a few laps around the hallway, as the doctor wanted her to do to get her circulation going. to prevent blood clots and help remove the excess fluid. After that, however, over the next day or two, a lot of things happened very quickly. First, her blood pressure was very low, and this had been an ongoing problem over the course of the days that she had been in the hospital. If her blood pressure was too low, she was unable to get the medication she needed for her heart. That heart medication ultimately lowers your blood pressure, but helps the heart. In addition, she needed the blood pressure for the diuretics and to remove the excess fluid. Basically, she needed blood pressure for all of the medications she needed for other things. And it had been on the low side. A few times they hadn't been able to give her medication. But this time the blood pressure was very low. And it was so low that she was unable to get her pain medication, she was unable to get her heart medication, she was unable to get her diuretics, and she was moved immediately to the intensive care unit. Once we were in the ICU, it was a slow process of realizing that things probably weren't going to get better. Basically, the blood pressure was the primary issue. She was unable to maintain blood pressure, and so they had her on several medications that increase your blood pressure by constricting the blood vessels, vasopressors. The goal was to give her these medications until she recovered enough that she could maintain her own blood pressure. Then they could slowly remove those medications, as well as giving her the other medications that she needed to improve the various other things that were going wrong. And her hemoglobin was still dropping. This meant, according to the doctor, that she either had internal bleeding somewhere, although they hadn't been able to find any on an abdominal ultrasound near her liver, or that she had hemolysis. Basically, her body was destroying its own red blood cells, as I understand it, which could be due to a number of things, including infection. She could have had sepsis. She could have had appendicitis. She could have had any number of conditions. They were giving her antibiotics at that point, as well as several other medications, because the goal of the ICU is to treat as quickly as possible without waiting for a bunch of tests. And more to the point, at that point, she was not stable enough to scan or test for additional things. And even if she had been, they wouldn't have been able to give her surgery or any of the other things that she would have needed to fix them. In addition, she was having respiratory trouble, and so her blood was becoming acidic as a result of respiratory failure. So there were two solutions to this. First, she was intubated and knocked out. And second, she was given pH medication for her blood, basically infusions of bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate. There was still a lot of excess fluid that was a risk to the heart and putting pressure just generally on everything, but there was no central pocket of fluid that could be tapped and removed safely, but fluid was sort of diffuse throughout all of her tissue. And despite all of this, her blood pressure was simply far too low. Basically, her blood was too watery. It was too much fluid and not enough blood, yet they weren't able to keep the fluid in the blood. It was going throughout all the vessels and throughout all of the tissue in her body. There was one treatment that they hoped she would be able to tolerate to fix some of these problems. All of these problems really being symptoms of whatever was really going wrong, but hopefully to alleviate it and save her. And that was CRRT, or continuous renal replacement therapy, which is basically a slow dialysis. The goal was to remove the extra acid from her blood, to remove the extra fluid from her blood, and to remove any remaining extra electrolytes from tumor lysis syndrome. But it was clear at that point that if she did not have the blood pressure to continue safely on CRRT, then she would not be able to survive. And basically that's what happened. Her medications were not able to raise her blood pressure. On that point, she was on the maximum dose of every vasopressor and blood pressure increasing medication that they had, and her blood pressure was still dropping significantly. The blood pressure kept falling to the point where really we were just measuring the pressure coming out of all of the pumps that were giving her medication. And so at that point, we removed the dialysis, removed the respirator, and that was basically it. So obviously this leaves a lot of questions. First, medical questions. The basic understanding we have without an autopsy or any additional investigation, which we're not going to do, is that there was some sort of abdominal catastrophe, that her liver, the cancer in her liver, was in a serious condition, and that or any number of other things caused a very sudden change in her condition. This could have been internal bleeding into the liver that we didn't see on the ultrasound. This could have been necrosis in the liver from the cancer or another source. Could have been a blood clot in the liver. Could have been a blood clot in the lungs. As I mentioned, it could have been an infection. Any one of those things or other things could have occurred very quickly. And once they did occur, there was nothing really to do, because at that point, her blood pressure dropping as a result, she was no longer stable enough to do much about it. The ICU, of course, did everything they could. The doctors did everything they could, but ultimately, she wasn't really able to be saved at that point. There's also the question of what weakened her heart in the first place. Her echocardiograms had looked pretty good, but why was her heart rate so high? Why was there heart failure to the point that she was accumulating all this fluid? Why did she have to go to the hospital in the first place? As I mentioned, it's probably a result of a prior medication, but the exact cause is not completely certain. It could have been pressure from additional things that were occurring, the liver, for example. So where do we go from there? First, I want to encourage you all to grieve with hope. Samantha is in the joy and comfort of her Savior, Jesus Christ. And we will be reunited with her and with all of the faithful saints in our own time. Second, I want you to understand that we knew this was coming someday. We had hoped it would be decades or years, but ultimately, metastatic breast cancer, that is in vital organs, shortens lives. Nobody knows exactly how often. Nobody knows exactly to what period, because every person has different conditions. Every person's body is different. But we knew that her life would be shorter than most people's. And so we have discussed this. And because of that, I want you to understand that Samantha did not have regrets. There have been a lot of videos on this channel about the various treatment decisions she's made, the various life decisions she's made, and I want you to know that she did not regret any of them. We treasured the time that we had and the decisions we made, the places we went, the places we lived, and of course the daughter that we had. We do not at all regret any of that. So then the question is, what's going to happen to this channel? And the answer is not much. You didn't subscribe to this channel to hear from me. You probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't really have, frankly, that much to say, nor am I as good at putting it into a video as Samantha was. That said, there will be a couple exceptions to that general silence that this channel will have. The first is anything that Samantha recorded prior to her death. I'm aware of at least one video that she recorded, I believe, in November. My intention is eventually, and please be patient, to edit that and put it on the channel. And anything else that I find that is suitable for the channel, I will put there. When watching those videos, and I'll add some sort of disclaimer, of course understand what has happened in the context of the video. It may not be exactly the context it was. In fact, will not be exactly what the context of the video was when she filmed it. But that said, the purpose of this channel is to educate, to share, and to help with the experiences Samantha had. And I intend to do that if she left any additional footage to do that with. The second possible exception is if there are things that you really want to know, if there are unanswered questions that any of you have, and if any of you really want to hear them from me, please let me know in the comments. I will read those from time to time, and if there is overwhelming demand, I may put together some sort of Q&A video where I answer some questions from the comments. Again, if I do that, please be patient. This is not my primary occupation. This is not something I have a lot of time to do, but I do want to make sure that any lingering questions that would be helpful, especially to those of you with similar experiences, that those questions ultimately do get answered. Finally, I have just a few requests. First, to keep my family, Samantha's family, in your prayers. And second, to be respectful. I won't hesitate to remove any comment that is disrespectful to Samantha or to my family. I'd also ask you to be respectful of our privacy. Of course, this is a public YouTube channel. Samantha put a lot of information here, all of which will remain. I have no intention of removing anything from this YouTube channel. But if you find more information about Samantha elsewhere, think twice before you put it here, because it's exactly where it's supposed to be. It's posted for the audience that it's supposed to have, and not all that information necessarily is best shared here on this channel, where Samantha was blessed with a large audience. And finally, if you want more memories of Samantha, I'm going to put some links wherever they can go, not that I know how to use YouTube, I think in the description, to some of her other channels, which were all projects that Samantha loved to work on. They include memories from her life, things she produced, creative things from years and years and years ago and from relatively recently. At any rate, there's a lot of great stuff on those channels, and if you want more of Samantha, I would encourage you to go check out as many of them as you can. Other than that, thank you all so much for your years of support. Thank you for your prayers and for your concern, and God bless you all.